Hello everyone, welcome to another game review, this time for Project Winter, which originally the PS4 version that I played released in 2021. Here's a review I wrote back then. So let's get one thing straight. If you're familiar with Among Us, the concept of Project Winter won't feel too unfamiliar to you. However, whilst Amongst Us was the first game of a similar ilk that sprung to my mind, there's more to Project Winter than a simple reskin of this game. With that little bit of admin out of the way, let's get into things. So Project Winter can be placed in the very imaginary but very real, a paradox for sure, genre of video games that I've called social experiment games. Maybe I didn't coin this phrase when I originally said it back then. I think they might be called social deception games as an actual genre. There we go, similar terms I've heard used before. But essentially, video games of this kind tend to focus on the idea of having sort of a team of players working towards a common goal, but select members of the group are secretly carrying out nefarious tasks to sabotage your hard work. These games bring out paranoia and mistrust, but they are also extremely fun. So the overall group size in Project Winter, 8 players, a little less in some cases. Lobby put in the ratio of survivors to traitors from 6 to 2 at the time I played, which works well after all. You couldn't be too traitor-sided, and when someone brings their A game to the traitor team, then 2 of the pesky blighters are more than suitable for getting the job done. So it also means that you can't necessarily single out and identify the traitors too quickly. You won't want the game to finish too prematurely just because they're playing super smartly. Now, normal mode allows for the disruption of extra roles, or distribution of extra roles, as to say, amongst players. The medic can heal down survivors, scientists can go one step further and raise the dead under correct circumstances. Scout is able to use traitor hatches and can identify the location of other players, provided that they have the same colour of radio. But of course, if you're using a traitor hatch and you're not a traitor, be careful, people don't think you are. The Defector has the ability to unlock traitor crates, and the Soldier is capable of withstanding extra damage from wild animals. Also knows the location of an armory under the completion of a first objective. Now, if you're still with me, there's a few more roles to go. So the Hacker can unlock bunkers or utilise electronic scrap to open the Truth Serum lab or the armory without the assistance of others, and the Detective uses their sleuthing skills to quickly identify who may be a potential traitor. Now finally, the Identity Thief has the role of stealing another's identity so as to become them, but don't worry if that was a lot to take in, all those roles, because this review I'm going to cover each of the different aspects of the game and many of those roles mentioned, so things should hopefully become clearer. That was just a rundown. Now, once the lobby is filled and you begin to load into the game, there's what I thought a genuinely exciting and pretty tense wait to see whether you'll end up survivor or traitor, and then of course which subsequent role, if not a traitor, that you'll be assigned. So from what I could tell, it was random assigning to each person, and there's a set limit for each role, but still a thrill nonetheless. Now in the basic mode, you won't be assigned any of the extra roles, but you will be assigned these in normal mode, so you can have them available in custom games as well. And before we continue, I will quickly break down the difference between basic and normal mode, and then from then on out, just assume I'm talking about my experiences in normal mode, so because everything applies there, and then you'll simply notice when playing which isn't applicable to normal mode when you're in basic mode. So both modes do have you repeating the cycle over and over of smashing ore, knocking down trees, obtaining crafting materials, which allow you of course to craft, required parts to fix generators and other useful items. So in basic mode the map is smaller, time limit is less, in turn means finding areas of interest easier. But in normal mode you may also be presented with a dig site task where it's up to you to decipher whereabout on the map you need to be digging for certain resources, thanks to some handy photographs provided. Now I didn't come across this in basic mode, but if that just so happens I didn't come across it, correct me if I'm wrong. Ultimately though, whatever your preferred mode, the core premise remains largely the same, that is survival. Now there is a third blackout mode, but at the time of me originally writing this review, and I haven't gone back to play the game in the last few years since, I didn't get a chance to check it out, so I can't comment on that, but there you go. Now the hunger and warmth meter still factor into basic mode, but they are of course less severe, it seemed to me anyway. Project Winter describes the basic mode sort of as a gentle ease-in for newcomers, but even once I'd wrapped my head around the ins and outs of the game, I still opted for this over normal mode, because whilst the survival elements of Project Winter aren't too hardcore, I just prefer the simple life. There is a blizzard coming after all, but like I say, bear in mind the rest of this I'm still noting stuff as if you're playing the normal mode. So once all players are spawned into the cozy cabin, the game can begin, and you'll never start off knowing who has been assigned what roles or who is the traitor, which of course adds fun to the game. You could spoil things a little, you know, if you're communicating via party chat, but you know, where's the fun in that? Nowhere. Now, you'll find lots of interactable areas within the cabin where you can cook and craft, heat yourself up, pop a slip into the exile box to cast a vote of those acting suspicious, and ultimately use the radio to call for help. Now, I should note that exiling someone so that they can't enter the cabin and later discovering they were indeed the traitor feels brilliant. Casting out a poor innocent, on the other hand, does not. Now, upon exiting the cabin, you'll of course want to crack on with fixing the generators so that the radio is in top-tip condition and ready for you to call in the rescue vehicle, which is your primary goal as a survivor. Now, naturally, the aim for the traitors is to ensure this doesn't happen by whatever means necessary. So traitors can hinder a survivor and their progress simply by wasting time, a bit boring, or by being sneaky and sabotaging generators when they get an opportune moment. So if they're feeling extra sinister, of course, they may even try to bump you off if the opportunity arises. Now, from what I could tell, the map is randomly generated for each game. Points of interest and key locations may appear in similar places, as may resources and animal spawns, but you can never be 100% what will crop up in a certain spot. Now, if you're looking for the best way to collect required resources to repair the generators, alongside supplies essential for surviving against the elements, then seeking out bunkers is a pretty safe bet. These walled treasure troves will require 2 to 3 players to open them up, unless one of you of course has the particular role assigned, but banding together to do so is always worth it. Now, be alert and remember that anything inside is also up to grabs from the traitors. So, not content of course with nabbing all your loot, traitors can also access exclusive boxes throughout the map, often containing traps, weapons and resources for them to play around with. Now, by opening these boxes, traitor will receive a token or tokens, also earned by staying close to survivors, which they can spend on the goodies inside. So not all items in the traitor box seem to require payment, and like I say, the tokens can be used in other nefarious ways, such as swapping signposts that point back to the cabin, shopping those around, impeding repaired machinery, very rude indeed. Now, always be cautious of someone, of course, claiming that they've managed to open a traitor box because they've been assigned the role of the defector. Now, it's true that these players can open traitor boxes, but as to whether or not they're being genuine and that their distribution of resources won't be to help the group is, of course, on you to decide whether or not a risk to take. So the betrayal can indeed hurt. Now, you can gather resources out in the open world, as mentioned, and after doing so, you'll want to head back to the cabin to get crafting. Repair parts are arguably the most valuable thing that you can craft. And like I say, once you've crafted things such as tools, radios, which are needed, repair parts rather, because they're arguably the most valuable thing that you can craft. Right, let me restart that. You can gather resources out in the open world. There we go. Sorry, had a bit of a brain fart there. So resources out in the open world, like I say, you want to head back to the cabin to get crafting. Repair parts, arguably the most valuable thing that you can craft, but don't dismiss tools or radios either, or traps to catch animals with. So those more dubious of players, of course, may use traps and tools for their own nefarious means. And are they looking to become a friendly lumberjack, or is the tree trunk that they have in mind to chop down actually your neck? So chop off, I suppose. Now, melee combat was a bit of a mixed bag in my opinion. So the clunky nature of it was intentional, I felt. Brawling is no easy feat in the real world, but it also just felt maybe a little bit sloppy. I liked it, but I can see that others may not. Of course, using a ranged weapon alleviates this problem, now the shotgun being your best friend. But if you want to practice your aiming skills a bit more peacefully, there is a snowball fight that you can take part in whilst waiting in the lobby, so it helps sharpen your skills and have fun at the same time. Now, if a single survivor, even a single survivor, escapes, then the traitors have failed their task, but rest in peace to the fallen warriors. But should the traitors eliminate all those in their way, 1 point to them. So traitors can die and still claim victory though if all survivors still perish anyway. So an odd sense of humour the universe sometimes has. But remember, it doesn't matter what side you're on, you need to stay warm and you need to stay fed. And craftable fire kits may help a little if you're not in the cabin, but they aren't going to grant you immortality. So if you're not content with having a mega blizzard cause your demise, of course, Project Winter also has global events that crop up throughout each game, which is exactly what happens will vary, but there's a few events that I encountered, such as a very chilly blizzard, one that impairs your hearing or vision. There's wild animals descend en masse, a particularly disorienting one where you find yourself randomly teleported to a different location, and I've not experienced it myself when I played the game, but I also heard on the video game grapevine that one global event features bunnies, and it gets pretty mad. So whatever the event is though, it brings an extra layer to the gameplay that isn't too complex but can really shake things up, and I actually found quite amusing, quite welcome. So during the game, of course, several ways to communicate, which is of course essential. So to the more nimble-fingered of players, text chat and emotes could be your go-to method, but I personally found the proximity voice chat and the use of radio communication far more efficient. So of course I've no doubt that having to use those methods is an intentional design that adds to the sort of survivability of the game alongside tension. Having a survivor or a traitor near you, hearing their voice get louder and louder or peter away as they move further from you, really added something to the game for me. You'll understand when you play. So for example, in one scenario I was calling out to be revived after a run-in with a particularly angry moose. I saw the light and I finally left those pearly white gates. But a survivor reached me. It was too late though, and I can only imagine that they started off hearing maybe a faint whisper, followed by the sound of a dying comrade until it grew louder, only to cease altogether. Alas, I'll never forget that they tried. But on a different, more humorous occasion, one player began punching me for no apparent reason, so my natural and, in my eyes, logical conclusion was that they were the traitor, so as such I began punching back. A third player saw what was happening and they jumped in to aid me. The whole thing decided to quickly descend into chaos, a free-for-all, and amusingly it turned out in the post-game lobby that the three of us were survivors, and the innocent cries were justified. So as to why this random survivor started punching me, maybe they just suspected I was a traitor. But like I say, as also noted, if you have a radio of the same colour as your teammate, then you can communicate with them over long distances, but don't become reliant on them, and in all fairness, you don't need to be. I've played many games back in time where people didn't have radios at all, got along just fine, until a traitor, or of course a mega blizzard, knocked us for 6. Now of course I do understand that communicating over a headset isn't for everyone. Of course I'm not going to judge you if this isn't how you like to play games or if you find it uncomfortable, but as the game points out, communication is key, so bear that in mind if you're thinking of picking up Project Winter. So as is the case with any online game, there's of course a few bad apples out there to try and take away the fun, but I had many games where I laughed and there was good vibes, so don't be deterred by the few. Remember the game also is entirely multiplayer, if that's a factor as to whether or not you buy it. So I'm going to close off this review of Project Winter with a few final bits of praise. Now for both newcomers to the genre and veterans alike, I didn't think that things are too complicated. The tutorial doesn't go as in-depth as some may hope for, but I still had a grasp of things after a full game or two, and experience, as they say, is often the best teacher. So depending on what time of day I was playing, there was either sort of a lull in the numbers or easy to hop into games. With this review, you're probably now hearing it several years later. I'm not sure how big the community is, but I still managed to find games even in quiet periods. Now, on the subject of time, a full game in normal mode can last up to 30 minutes, another reason I preferred the smaller time limit of basic mode. And like I say, this can be fun under the right circumstances, but things can get a bit dull if you're caught early on. Of course you can opt to stay in the game and watch events unfold, which can be quite amusing, but you become a spirit in this case. You can warm up, feed or heal other players, but also you can feel naughty and you can freeze players to slow them down or hinder them. So the game is an entertaining one. Like I say, this provides some laughs, but nobody is communicating, then games can be a little stale. So whatever you do, of course, earns you in-game currency. You can use this to purchase new cosmetics for your character. I never put a huge amount of time into this aspect of Project Winter, but it was nice to see when I did. Putting on new coats always nice. So I'd finally like to note the soundtrack was pretty brilliant. There's a track overlaid with the gameplay. It's sort of upbeat, gives a sense of hope, but there's also ambient sounds in the mix, or no sound at all, which all culminates in an atmosphere that I felt genuine as it can, despite the fact I've never been stuck out in the frozen wilds. And I also like the visual style of the game, and the camera being isometric worked to its favour, I thought. So basically, the game runs pretty well. The final consensus for Project Winter would be recommended. So it was a pleasant surprise to me, this game, especially considering it was one of my first forays into such a genre, and if other players are being decent human beings, there's a lot of fun to be had. It's weird to think that such a thing can work, but it does. Now, as long as you don't get too paranoid, you're in for a good time. As always, thanks for checking this game review out. If you would like to check out any other social media I use. It will be linked in the description below. As always though, stay safe, take care, peace and nugs.